Since a time in which Ethiopia had been formed as a nation state, the country had passed through different forms of governance: the egalitarian, autocratic rule, absolute monarchy, totalitarianism, military dictatorship, and the recent TPLF pseudo-revolutionary democracy are regimes ever entertained in the country's socio-economic and political endeavors. The quest for democratic rights, such as demanding freedom and seeking equality, had scored so many years, and it was a question that most matters generation after generations in Ethiopia. A lot had been paid to fight limited powers of the rulers in every generation. For instance, the 1916 students' movement in Ethiopia was the very worst mentioning revolution ever registered in the history of the nation-state to overthrow the imperial reigns. The 1916s were the pivotal years in political resistance of Ethiopia. Many Ethiopians were displeased by the then monarchical and feudal land structures. By then, colossal figure of students flooded into the streets of Finfinne, the nation's capital, chanting the slogan "Land to the Tiller," their target, the land system that impoverished the country's large farming population. Demonstrations expanded in subsequent years, and the national questions was added to the mix of grievance living in the country with scores of languages, ethnicity, and traditions. Many Ethiopians felt that the ruling class was dominated by a small selected groups of corporates.
Main student demands in the process of struggle was the right of the Ethiopian people generally, not in a fragmented way like we see today. Today, if you see struggle fragmented along ethnic side, but at that time, under the auspice of the Ethiopian students, university students, all the students struggle against the regime on behalf of the Ethiopian people. They demand land question, land rights to the public. For instance, that struggle was a very popular struggle led by students, a very inclusive struggle, as I told you, with a very clear question on behalf of the people. Finally, the students' unity and very sporadic military interventions overthrown the imperial regime. And the land question was answered. Land to tiller, the question of land, the public quest for lands was resolved by the then struggle. Unfortunately, as you said, a form of government, of course not government, interim military junta was established. Apart from resolving the land question, they ignored basic questions of human rights, democratic rights, and equality, most importantly. And then the struggle continued.
The students were critical in raising these concerns. Many met and built solidarity in Marxist reading groups where the workers of Lenin, Mao, and later the New Left flourished. The leftist organizations grew and morphed. In addition to that, all Ethiopian Socialist Movement, Miason, and the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, the Derg, a committee comprised of low-ranking officers of the Ethiopian army, gained support from Miason and grew in influence. In 1974, it was the Derg who overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie and monarchy armed mass protests. Those who were hoping for a pluralistic democratic country were soon disappointed. While the Derg implemented radical land reform and abolished feudalism, they also anointed themselves rulers of one-party Marxist-Leninist state. The Derg regime, which was known for its socialism ideology, ruled Ethiopia with absolute dictatorship for about 17 solid years. The Derg regime's demise was made possible by a guerrilla movement such as TPLF and other fronts, and finally the Derg military junta was overthrown by TPLF.
The military junta, a kind of new form of structure of struggle involved, like a struggle in the form of organization. In the organization, organized struggle like OLF and the EPLF and the TPLF. This kind of structure rejuvenated itself against the military junta. The military junta continued human rights operations for some possible years. Finally, that was overthrown by the TPLF with the cooperation, not alone even, with the cooperation of I think 18 armed struggle. Though TPLF and OLF were the key political unity among all. At that time, some historical, very historical, in my opinion, things will happen. The structure of the state structural reform, what we call federal states, established along the constitution, and the constitution was named the Federal Constitution of the Democracy of Ethiopia. Now that is the new structure with the new nomenclature. But though some elements of human rights, democratic rights, and even to the extent to recognize the right to self-determination up to secession was recognized, operationally it failed. Most of the politicians referred it as the tiger on the paper. That's why the struggle continued.
TPLF has reigned with the fake hashtag of EPRDF coalition and ruled the country with iron fist by coining a pseudo-revolutionary democracy.
TPLF was an exemplary authoritarian group. And if you recall its 27 years of leadership in Ethiopia, it was an exemplary of very serious authoritarian activities with no element of democracy in it. And I can say it didn't have any element of democracy in its real sense. It was not participatory, the system was not transparent enough, and TPLF doesn't know anything about accountability, and all the democratic principles and values were almost absent in TPLF regime. And I can't even say TPLF exercised federal system in Ethiopia. There was no any federal practical arrangements in Ethiopia. All the federal nomenclatures that we have in the constitution were almost fake, and they were not practically implemented, and all the regions were not autonomous in real sense, and they were governed by a very small group that are assigned from the center towards the interest of the small TPLF groups for their personal interests. And I can say even the elections that we had over the last 27 years are almost fake and false, because they don't fulfill any criteria or measurement of democratic election in real sense. So the freedom of institutions were almost hampered, and the freedom of citizens to select whoever they want was almost absent, and the elections were not free, fair, and democratic in all measurements. That is why TPLF, in the name of democracy, was simply deceiving the Ethiopian people and the international community, and I didn't see any democratic element in the 27 years of the TPLF regime.
After tolerating all the maladministration of TPLF for about 3 decades, Ethiopians from all corners started to resist the regime's bad governance and ousted and made it flee to the edge. In overthrowing TPLF, the Oromo, Keros, and Kores took the lion's share. Hundreds of thousands were killed and tortured in fighting TPLF regime. The TPLF rule was characterized by maladministration such as corruption, nepotism, abuse of power, resource smuggling, contrabands, economic monopoly, and sabotage, genocide, mass murder, fake conspiracy, poor governance, and so forth. This all baggage of problem made Ethiopians to fight against TPLF.
This struggle very recently reform itself into the new form of movement, like what we call the Arab Spring. In the Arab Spring, the Arab Revolution, which ranged from Tunisia to the Middle East, they used the use of social medias, Facebook, Twitter, even some people call it the Twitter revolution. We had also get that chance with the uprising of the Cairo movement and that helped the Kairos and the Kares, even some politicians, to push the struggle forward. And then they finally, I can't call it overthrown, but pushed the very few top leaders of this to the edge.
Finally, while the political tension caused by popular uprising and internal resistance with EPRDF member parties got worse and went out of control, resulting in months-long protests in the Oromia and Amhara regions that led to dozens of days of civilians made Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn resign from power. After having a very tough motions that lasted for 40 nights, the parliament had chosen Dr. Abiy Ahmed as the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Right, he took office, he had never wasted time in accelerating the reform agenda.
Political reform is done, and some unexpected events also, like the release of the dozens of the prisons, both from the country, inside the country, and also those who were arrested actually in the diaspora. And maybe the arrested in a sense that, this all struggle voice had a chance to come together under one umbrella in the country. They were invited actually by these governments, and that's why we see events like OLF came to their homeland after like minimum of the 13 years. Like the gov't, Sevat, and so many very radical organizations that were referred as the terrorist groups, get a chance to reback and remove that negative connotation. And these are all critical changes that occurred with this recent youth uprising.
If you see the grave mistakes and the historical errors that were made by TPLF regime over the last 27 years, they are all related to the political, economic, and social problems that it had over the last 27 years, which are very serious when it comes to democratic exercises, when it comes to economic problems, including corruption and illicit financial outflows, grave illicit financial outflows, and also human rights abuses, and also good governance and service delivery problems that we are facing over the last 27 years. So these are very serious issues that push the public towards the roads, and popular protesters burst over the last 3 years. So these reforms are results of the popular protesters here and there throughout the country. So these popular protesters were pushing, the EPRDF itself to look into its internal chemistry and come up with some sort of reform from within. That's why within the EPRDF leadership, we had the reformist leaders who were coming up with a new vision for Ethiopia, with a new value for Ethiopia, and with a solution in such a way that we can democratically solve Ethiopian problems without going into armed struggles and other forms of violent struggles. So the reform that emerged over the last 3 years tried to avoid armed struggles and violent revolution and come up with a reform type solutions for the Ethiopian public. So the administration of Dr. Abiy Ahmed and his team came up with reforms from within in such a way that we can have democratic values for Ethiopia, democratic reforms for Ethiopia, which has a very strategic long-term objective in terms of bringing the Ethiopian public on board and having diverse but unified Ethiopia. That has come And you know, the Ethiopian public, 150 million Ethiopian people, know that the reform that has emerged over the last 3.5 years has a very strategic importance for the citizens. And the public knows this very well. And that's why when it comes to the election, even though over 47 parties were participating in the election, the Ethiopian public were very much eager to have this reform to continue and bring fruits to the public in terms of, you know, solving the political problems, the economic problems, and the social problems that we had over the last 27 years. So with all sorts of problems, the public determined to elect Prosperity Party as its promising party in terms of solving its problems.
When you see Dr. Abiy, when he came to the power, he already accepted by the people. It's not only by Ethiopians, by the rest of the world. He's already recognized, he's already accepted. The only thing is, it's a question of procedure after the election. Procedurally, to be a legitimate government, that is how the election is did. And he was already accepted by the society. He's accepted by the rest of the world. And he win the heart of everybody. And that is one of the things that we need to recognize. Whatever the case, when you lead a nation, it's not easy. You cannot make everybody happy. It's not a small, happy family. We have differences. We are almost more than 80 or something nation and nationalities. And with all these things, he just tried to lead the country, and he's successful.
Over the past 3.5 years, so many grand achievements had been gained by the reform leadership amid COVID outbreak, GERD-related political baggage, TPLF's terrorism, and U.S. blind political intervention. The past 3.5 years was the testing light for the Ethiopian to examine Dr. Abiy's administration, and due to the workers being undergone over the aforementioned years, made Prosperity Party win the 6th national election in Mamo's figure. The 6th national election was said to be the only democratic election when it is compared with the past 5 national elections conducted in Ethiopia, where the winning party used to be predetermined but used to be carried out for ceremonial purpose.
Can't compare the last 4 or 5 elections because the reason that there was a revolution is the last elections was not true elections. That's why the youth of Ethiopia, the youth of different nations, nationalities, different regions come together, and they said no for that government because the elections are just false elections. So we are seeing the 6th election as a first election, because we are trying to change the culture of changing the government from gun to ballot box. We are trying to make that, but as you know, every change is step by step. We hope that we will do better in the future, even though there are some irregularities. The people of Ethiopia decided by whom to be governed. So we expect a lot because the political differences we do have for the last 30, 40 or 50 years are very essential to solve, to come to the economic, the cultural, because Ethiopia is a big country with a fertile resource, good air condition, with so many minerals, and furthermore, the youth is a resource by itself. So we can make Ethiopia prosperous in the near future, but we have to bring political solution first. Actually, as a diverse country, as Ethiopia, which has different nationalities, religion, political background. As a diverse country, landslide is not advisable most of the time. 50 plus 1 is better. Enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a hope that to make the parliament to represent this diversity. Unfortunately, it didn't happen on this election, but election is not the end of the world. We do have another elections. We do have locality and district elections in the future. If your country is peace, if the people of Ethiopia gets peace and works in a better condition, every 3 or 5 regular years we do have election. But if you make a chaos in your country, you didn't imagine for the next 15 or 20 years about election. So that's why we have to be wise and have what we have and improve it in the future. So for the future, the government shall see and articulate what are the political differences that we have, what are the main issues that arises between the political forces. Just ignore the nationalities, the political parties, the religions, whatever different. But what are the political issues that must be on the table to a debate? Because there is no shortcut for democracy.
There have been so many elections. We count them as we have, including the recent one, part through the 6 elections. But election, in quotation, election should have its own basic pillar elements, like free, as the white called, free, fair and fair election. That is one of the basic and minimum requirements internationally. And why election is important is people collectively do have their will to continue living, will to survive, will to just survive on the earth, will to just exercise their basic and natural rights, their human rights, and then extend this human right to democratic rights, which we think very expensive in some African countries. And then they realize this through election. And that election require those basic requirements that you mentioned now. Must be free in the sense that popular participation should not be bridled, should not be limited. And then that election terms should be fixed, and according to that fixation, the government should just have election at that point in time. And then should be fair, which means that the National Election Board should be fair. The voice of the collective voice of the popular voice should be respected, and this all are the very fundamental elements that one election should fulfill. If we see from this point of view, those elections, especially the 5 elections, cannot fulfill this qualification. It is not fair. That's why people cry from the corner to that corner. The only thing it maybe approximately it fulfilled is the term paradigm. After 5 years, we had an election, but people continue crying. And then people lost trust from the government. From the government, they lost trust. And the government also, on the contrary, exacerbate this. Like it report, for instance, on the 5th election, an expected figure to the people who lost trust from it.
Democracy needs, good faith, truth, and full-heartedness. TPLF is literally a communist type arrangement. that doesn't believe in democracy. And they were simply playing a game in the name of democracy, and they were not democratic. Because to exercise democracy, you have to be internally democratic. And if you are not internally democratic, you can never exercise democracy outside in the public. That's why TPLF from the very beginning is a communist, extremely authoritarian party that does not have any attitude and practice of democracy. Democratic values were almost absent within the structure of TPLF and EPRDF. That's why all the elections that have been claimed to be democratic over the last 27 years were not democratic by all standards. One, they were known to suppress all the democratic protests or opposition parties within the democratic exercises that we had over the last 27 years. And very genuine opposition parties were suppressed, either in exile or they were arrested. And democratic institutions such as civic associations, civic institutions, NGOs, religious institutions, professional associations were almost suppressed in the name of laws, procedures, and the like. And institutions of democracy such as the election board, the justice institutions, the human rights institutions were almost fake or paralyzed. That's why, one, in the absence of a true attitude toward this democracy, in the absence of true value toward this democracy within yourself, and in the absence of professional, free, and competent institutions that can run elections and run democratic exercises within the country, you can never exercise genuine election. That is why all these institutions were almost absent or paralyzed or suppressed. Then the 5 elections that we had in the 27 years of TPLF regime were almost forced, fake, to save face in the name of the international community.
The new government formation is under making in Ethiopia. The winning party along the contesting political parties made cabinets both in the regional and federal levels. A lot is expected from the new government in implementing its social contracts.
Election, particularly the democratic election, is about social governance. It's about social compact in which the people pass over their own will, their own social political contract to the agents called governments. That's an oath. The government receiving that contract is an oath, political oath. Therefore, the government should be able to bear that oath, able to imply that oath, which consists of political demands like democratic rights, like the right to express your own whatever, like the people who have economic quest that have been suppressed for the long year, we know, and then the government should be able to bear this. For this, the government needs to restructure itself, the structure which is capable of bearing all this odds, capable of this. And above all, the people, particularly in my observation, consider these government leaders as their own children. They claim ownership of them, even they call them our children. This is big responsibility. If somebody claim owning you, say you are mine, this goes beyond political demand to the moral extensionism. Therefore, this government should fight against corruption, because your own children should not corrupt you. Therefore, plus the political responsibility, along with that oath, this government has moral responsibility to fight against corruption, which had been one of the bottlenecks in this country.
The last 3.5 years of reform within Ethiopia has taught us a very important lesson of accommodating diversity and giving attention to the Ethiopian unity. And this is a very important opportunity that Ethiopia has gained over the last 3.5 years. And the government to be formed wants to enhance and broaden this unity within diversity and establish a strong Ethiopia that can solve its own problems through domestic resources and domestic efforts. And therefore the public, the diaspora Ethiopians, and also the Ethiopians who are residing within the Ethiopian territory should provide their support. This strategic support, I believe, will in one way or another build a strong Ethiopia which can economically sustain its problems and politically stabilize its own internal problems, and also a country that can prosper in all aspects and shine out in East Africa. And that's why I am calling upon all Ethiopians to provide their support.
Hoji barbadu fennufe, hoji barbade achi boda Afrika sene, Afrika erga sene boda Afrika kan nu kafalam qarshi kumataka, qarshin kumataka mo yaw mana kira dibba ja kafalla kan nu aftu birri dibba afuri moyu ka wan baye bitama gamma mati kadanne mati rajirana.
After I graduated from university, it was tough to me to find a job, and I remained unemployed for a long while, and finally I was forced to join a certain factory with a small salary, which is 1,000 birr. Out of this sum, I paid 600 birr for house rent, and the remaining 400 birr wouldn't do anything to me. I still get support from my family. It had been 3 years since I had been graduated from university. I had a BA degree in ICT. I don't have any free time to hunt and read vacancy notice, and I always start work 8 a.m. in the morning and leave work at 6 a.m. Monday through Saturday. For instance, I came here to see vacancy openings today since it is Sunday and I am off duty. However, the sad thing is that all the vacant posts require long years job experiences without being hired by my profession. I urge the new government to facilitate ways for unemployed citizens to have job either through micro-scale enterprises by arranging funds or hiring them at different posts. I have big hope upon the new government, which is in the making.
Birri yookaan aga qabaatite nu kenname akka ittiin hojjennu isarraa hawwii kana qabna jedheetani maal.
Mootummaan haarofni hundeeffamu waan irraa eegu tokkoffaa uummata keenyaaf ka waan gaarii yaadu biyya keenyaaf waan gaarii yaadu an tokko nu tokkoomsu tokkummaa keenya eegatee.
The priority of the new government should be addressing public's request in very first place, and should work on unifying the nations and nationalities to have common values and respect their differences as well. It has to be the time in which democracy should bloom out and fully exercise. In the meantime, the new government has to work on combating the ever-existed corruption in the country. Similarly, the government in the making ought to work on halting economic inflation that is being witnessed these days. Nowadays, our people are staggering to lead their life. The price of everything is skyrocketing. However, I am confident that the new government will take corrective measures for the sake of its people. Whereas in the area of political segment, the new government must work with contesting political parties, and I am really hopeful that it would be implemented for real. I urge the new government to fight against corruption, but it needs time to be resolved.
መንግስት የሥራ ዕድል ለወጣቶች ቢፈጥር የተሻለ ነው። ምክንያቱም ወጣቶች በጣም እየተጎዱ ነው ያሉት። እኛ ተምረን ለፍተን ምንም ስራ ማናገኝ ከሆነ መማራችን ምንም ትርጉም ላይኖረው ነው። ስለዚህ የሥራ ዕድል ቢፈጥርልን።
The new government should create job opportunities for the youth and new graduates. These days, big number of students are being graduated from universities but couldn't find job and remain being unemployed. If we remain jobless after graduation, exerting efforts and sacrificing all the necessary preliminaries are nonsense at all. Vacant openings wouldn't fit with our credential and experiences. We used to go to college for our study, not to have a job experiences. Most vacancies have no room for new graduates, and the new government should seriously work on this. The users of today are leaders of tomorrow, so the government should give keen concern to this.
በትክክል ተምረው ምንም ስራ ሳያገኙ ቤት ውስጥ ቤተሰብ በዛ ላይ ቤተሰብ ደካሞች ምናምን ይሆናሉ። ሁሉ ጊዜ አስተምረው እነሱ ላይ የሚደርሰው አእምሮ ጉዳት ራሱ በጣም ይከብዳል። ስለዚህ የተሻለ የሥራ ዕድል ብናገኝ የተሻለ ነው።
The elected government had a social contract with its people to lead the country for the next 5 consecutive years, and a lot is expected from it.